Back in 2013, I was 20 years old, just a regular college kid trying to make a living. I worked part-time delivering pizzas for a small shop called Tony's Pizza Spot in the little town of Maple Creek. Most nights were quiet, just me driving, around with the radio on, dropping off orders and heading home. Nothing weird ever happened, until that one stormy night. It was close to 10:30 p.m., and I was getting ready to clock out when the phone rang at the shop. My boss, Tony, called me over and handed me one last order. The address was 226 Briarwood Lane, right on the edge of town where the houses were spread far apart and the streetlights barely worked. I sighed, grabbed the pizza, and headed out into the pouring rain. The storm was getting worse. Thunder rumbled and big flashes of lightning lit up the sky. The windshield wipers barely kept up with the rain. I finally pulled into the long, cracked driveway of the house. It looked old, like no one had really taken care of it in years. The lawn was wild and overgrown. One of the porch lights was flickering, and the windows were covered by thick curtains. Not a single light from inside shone through. I got out of the car, holding the pizza box close to keep it dry. As I walked up to the front door, I had this weird feeling in my stomach, like something was off. Still, I knocked. A tall man opened the door. He looked like he hadn't slept in days. His dark hair was messy and there were heavy bags under his eyes. He might have been in his early 40s. "Pizza delivery," I said with a friendly smile. He blinked at me, looking confused. Are you sure you have the right house? This is 226 Briarwood Lane, right? I asked, holding up the receipt. He nodded slowly. Yeah, that's this place, but we didn't order anything. Now I was confused too. I double-checked the order on my phone. It's listed right here, same address, same time. Maybe someone else inside ordered it? He turned his head and called out, "Amy, did you order a pizza?" A woman's voice answered from inside. Two little kids peeked out from behind her, probably twins, around 3 or 4 years old. They all looked just as puzzled as he did. "No one ordered anything," the woman said, frowning. That's when I pulled out my phone and dialed the number that placed the order. After a few rings, someone picked up. The voice was rough and scratchy. "Yeah, that's the right address," the voice said. "They're saying no one here ordered pizza," I replied, glancing at the man. The voice on the other end gave this low, creepy laugh. "I'm in the shed at the end of the driveway. Bring it here." My heart skipped a beat. I turned cold. "The shed?" I said out loud. The man at the door heard me and suddenly looked pale. His eyes widened like he just realized something awful. "We don't have anyone staying in our shed," he said, his voice shaky. The woman stepped closer, wrapping her robe tightly around herself. "What's going on?" she asked, looking scared. I told them exactly what the voice had said. Suddenly, the air felt heavy. We all stood there in silence for a second, listening to the rain pound on the roof and the thunder rolling in the distance. The man, his name was Mark, grabbed a flashlight from just inside the door, ignoring his wife's protests. "I'll check it out," he said, clearly shaken. I don't know why, but I followed him. The walk down the driveway toward the shed felt like the longest walk of my life. The rain had turned the dirt into mud, and every step felt harder than the last. The shed stood at the very end of the property, nearly hidden behind a row of trees. It looked even worse than the house. Rotting wood, one broken window, and a rusty padlock hanging open. Mark shined the flashlight on the door, then slowly pulled it open. The hinges groaned, making this long, creepy creaking sound. The smell hit us right away. It was damp and moldy, but underneath was something worse, like rotten food and something dead. Mark swept the flashlight across the room, and I swear my stomach turned. In the corner was a dirty mattress covered in old, stained blankets. Empty food wrappers and cans were scattered everywhere, but the worst part? The walls were covered in scratches. Words had been carved into the wood over and over again. "I see you. I hear you. I watch you." I couldn't breathe, for a second. Someone had been living here watching them. Before I could say anything, my phone buzzed again. Same number. I hesitated, then answered. Hello? This time the voice was calm and chilling. You should have just left the pizza. At the door, suddenly we heard something from the house, a loud crash, glass breaking, and then the heavy thud of footsteps. We both froze. Then we ran. Back at the front door, Amy was standing there, frozen in place. Her eyes were wide with fear. Someone's inside, she whispered. Mark didn't waste a second. He ran into the kitchen, grabbed a knife, and stepped into the living room, flashlight still in his other hand. I followed him, my heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. The lights flickered as we walked in, and that's when we saw him. A man stood in the corner of the room. He was filthy, his clothes torn and wet, hair wild, eyes full of something twisted. He held a crowbar in one hand and was staring right at Mark. I told you, Marcus, he said with a grin. I'd always be here. I waited for you. Mark looked like he'd seen a ghost. Before I could react, Mark lunged at him with the knife. The man swung the crowbar and hit Mark on the arm with a sickening crack. Mark yelled in pain and dropped the knife. I panicked. I looked around and grabbed a heavy table lamp, ran up and smashed it over the intruder's head. He let out a grunt, stumbled and fell to the ground unconscious. Everyone was shaking. Amy ran to Mark, holding his arm while trying to keep the kids behind her. I stood there, still holding the broken lamp like it was a weapon. Mark picked up his phone with his good hand and called the police. He could barely get the words out, his voice shaking. When the cops arrived, they dragged the man out. That's when we found out the whole truth. His name was Darren, and he used to be with Amy, years before she met Mark. He had never moved on. Instead of leaving town, he stayed hidden, watching them, living in their backyard shed without them, ever knowing. As they pushed him into the back of the police car, he turned his head and looked straight at me. I can never let her go, he said with a sick smile. Never. I never delivered to that street again. I didn't even finish my shift that night. I drove straight home, locked the doors, and sat in silence while the storm kept raging outside. Even now, every time I hear thunder or see lightning outside my window, I remember that night. And I wonder, how many sheds out there are hiding someone who's watching, waiting, right now? I never liked working the late shift, especially on stormy nights. But at 23, you take the jobs you can get. Delivering for Papa Dino's Pizza in the small town of Millstone, Kentucky wasn't glamorous, but it paid the rent and kept gas in my beat-up car. That Friday night had been slow. Just a few orders and a whole lot of rain. Thunder rolled through the sky like a warning, and the lightning lit up the wet streets like flashbulbs. Around 10:50 p.m., just as I was thinking about heading back early, my phone buzzed with one last order. It was for Ridgeway Hospital. Seriously? I muttered. Who wants pizza from a hospital at almost 11? Still, I grabbed the 2 large pepperoni pies, zipped them into the warming bag, and threw on my raincoat. The wind had picked up, pushing rain sideways across the road. By the time I pulled into the hospital's parking lot, it looked like something straight out of a horror movie. Dim lights, flickering signs, not a single car except mine. I sat there for a second, just watching the rain slam against my windshield. Ridgeway had always creeped me out. It was old, built back in the 1960s, and everyone in town had a story about weird stuff happening there. Most of it was probably just small-town gossip. Still, something about that building gave me the chills. I grabbed the pizzas, pulled my hood tight, and ran through the downpour to the front doors. Inside, the place was too quiet. There was no one at the front desk, just a guy slumped in a chair with big headphones on, nodding off. Pizza delivery, I called. He didn't even look at me, just raised a hand and pointed down a hallway. Break room, second floor, junior doctors, elevators that way. I gave a quick thanks and headed toward the hallway, but the elevator he pointed to had a big out of order sign taped to it. Great. I didn't want to go back and bother the guy, so I kept walking, hoping to find stairs or another elevator. Around the corner, I found one. It looked older than the rest of the hospital. Scratched metal doors, yellowed buttons. But the light above said it was working, and I didn't want to wander the halls all night. The doors creaked open, and I stepped inside. That's when I realized I wasn't alone. There was a man standing in the back corner facing the wall. He was wearing dark green scrubs and a pair of old sneakers. His skin looked off, pale and almost wet, like he'd just crawled out of a lake. His shoulders were tense, and he wasn't moving at all, not a twitch. "Rough night?" I asked, trying to make conversation. No answer. That's when I noticed the yellow hospital wristband on his left wrist. "You a doctor?" I asked. "Or a patient?" Still nothing. Just silence. I glanced up at the elevator panel. The numbers changed slowly, and the lights flickered once, then again. That's when I heard it. A thump right above us, like something heavy had fallen on the roof of the elevator. "Did you hear that?" I asked, turning back toward him. And that's when he moved. His head twisted suddenly to the side, way too far. His neck made a popping sound, and his eyes, which had been staring blankly ahead, were now locked straight on me. Wide, unblinking, angry. Then came another thud, louder this time, like someone or something was slamming against the elevator roof. I panicked. I started pressing the door open button and then the one for the next floor. I didn't care where I got off, I just needed out. The man didn't move an inch, but his head stayed twisted toward me, that awful grin spreading across his face like he knew something I didn't. The elevator doors finally opened, and I bolted out into the hallway. I turned back just in time to see the doors close on him, but not before I saw his hand rise and slowly reach out, as if he wanted to follow me. The hallway was cold and too quiet. My shoes squeaked on the floor, and my breathing sounded way too loud. I kept walking, hugging the pizza bag to my chest like it could protect me. "Hello," I called out, hoping to hear someone, anyone. No answer. I passed a door with a small window. The glass was fogged up and smeared with something dark. I leaned closer, trying to see inside. Bang! The door rattled hard, like someone had thrown themselves against it from the other side. I jumped back, nearly dropping the pizzas. My heart was pounding. I stood frozen, staring at the door, waiting for it to open. But nothing happened. Then I saw the small sign next to the door. Mortuary. That was it. I was done. I turned and ran back the way I came, almost slipping as I pushed open the stairwell door. I flew down the steps 2 at a time, breathing hard. I just wanted out. When I hit the ground floor, I shoved open the door and nearly crashed into a young doctor standing in the hallway. "Whoa, easy. You okay?" he asked, holding me steady. There's someone in the elevator," I panted. He had a yellow wristband. "Something's wrong. He looked messed up. I think he might be dangerous." As soon as I said yellow wristband, the color drained from the doctor's face. "You said yellow?" he asked. I nodded. "That's not possible," he said quietly. "We use yellow wristbands for the deceased. Patients who didn't make it." I stared at him, my mouth dry. But he was in the elevator. I saw him." He shook his head slowly. "That elevator's been out of service for months." I didn't wait around to argue. I turned and ran for the front doors. As I got close, they slid open by themselves with a soft hiss, like they'd been waiting. A cold wind blew in, mixing with the smell of rain and something else, something rotten. And then, just as I stepped outside, I heard it, a voice, low, raspy, right behind me. Too close. "Next time, I follow you." "My name's Edward Bell, and I'm an accountant." Yeah, I know. Nothing thrilling about that. Most days I'd just punch in, do the books, grab a sandwich at lunch, and head home before dark. Safe, simple, predictable, but not anymore. Now I'd do anything just to be bored again. I used to work at a company called Greystone Wellness right in the middle of a quiet little town called Ashford Hollow. We didn't sell vitamins or gym memberships like you'd expect. No, we sold something called Harmony Stones. Supposedly, they were filled with positive energy and could block out bad luck, evil thoughts, and all that. To me, they were just shiny rocks with a fancy name and a higher price tag. But it didn't matter. The company was big, the pay was decent, and with the way bills were piling up, I couldn't afford to be picky. One of my co-workers, Jack Whitmore, actually believed in them. He'd go on about how the stones calmed him, helped him sleep better, even made his headaches go away. I liked Jack. He was easy to talk to, always cheerful, but I never bought into that stuff. Still, he believed, and I respected him for that. But then something changed. Jack, the same guy who cracked jokes at 8 a.m. and brought in biscuits for the team, started acting off. He got quiet, distant. Some days he barely said a word. I'd catch him just staring into space, looking tired, almost frightened. His skin went pale. The spark in his eyes was gone. Then one rainy Tuesday morning, we got the news. Jack had taken his own life. He jumped from the roof of the building. I didn't believe it at first. None of us did. It just didn't make sense. Jack was the heart of our little office, always helping, always smiling. And now, gone. The office felt like a tomb after that. His desk stayed untouched and no one dared sit there. We all just avoided it. But as luck would have it, his workload was handed to me. I was already stretched thin, but now I was staying, late most nights trying to make sense of what he'd been working on. Then came the night I found it. It was storming outside. Really storming. Rain was slamming against the windows, thunder shaking the lights, wind howling like it was alive. Most of the office had cleared out hours ago, but I was still there, knee-deep in reports. I opened Jack's bottom drawer, hoping to find a file he might have tucked away, and instead I found a notebook. Black leather cover. No label. I wouldn't have thought much of it except it was hidden under a false bottom, like he didn't want anyone to find it. Curious, I flipped it open. At first, it was nothing out of the ordinary, just daily notes, meeting reminders, to-do lists, a few random thoughts. Then I noticed something that made me freeze. There were entries written after Jack died. I stared at the pages, blinking hard, hoping I was just tired and seeing things. But no, the dates were there. The handwriting was his. Same loops, same short, sharp T's. I turned the pages slowly, heart thudding in my chest. How was that even possible? I sat there for a long time, just staring at the journal, the rain hammering against the window behind me. The air suddenly felt colder, heavier. The overhead lights buzzed. I started to get that awful feeling in my gut, the one that tells you you're not alone. Still, I told myself it was nothing. I was just tired, grieving. Maybe someone was pulling a cruel joke. I shut the journal, got up, and decided I needed coffee. The hallway was dim and dead quiet. As I walked to the break room, I noticed something near the vending machines, a shadow, just for a second. I stopped, looked again. No one was there. But when I turned back toward the coffee machine, I saw it. A shadow on the wall, shaped like a person. But no one was standing there. Something was blocking the light, but whatever it wasn't visible. I backed up slowly and decided to step outside for a smoke instead. The rain hadn't let up. It was pouring, like the sky was cracking open. I lit a cigarette with shaking hands, trying to calm myself down. But even then I kept looking back at the dark office windows, half expecting to see someone watching me. I nearly left then and there, but I couldn't stop thinking about the journal, It didn't feel right to ignore it, so I went back in. The moment I picked it up again, I could feel something was different. The air felt tense. Each new entry I read sounded more panicked. Jack had started writing about the stones, really writing. Not the usual, these help me focus kind of stuff. No, this was different. He wrote things like, "The stones aren't protecting us, they're watching us." I touched the black one again today. I think it's angry. I turned another page and saw something that made the hair on my neck stand up. I saw them last night, 3 of them. Shadows in the corridor. They don't want me to write this. I snapped the journal shut, but that's when the phone started ringing. One, then another, then another. Desk phones, conference room phones, even the one in the hallway. I picked one up and all I heard was static. No voice, just crackling, like someone was breathing on the other end. Listening. I hung up. Another phone rang, then another. I didn't answer again. I walked back to my desk, hands shaking. The lights overhead flickered again, casting shadows that seemed to stretch too, far across the room. I opened the journal one last time and turned to the final page Jack had written. The handwriting was messy, jagged, rushed. I made a mistake. The stones. They're not from here. They need people. They use people. And I think they've chosen me. Thunder cracked so loud outside it rattled the glass. Suddenly another phone rang behind me. This time I answered. Static, then a voice. Faint, whispering. It said my name. Edward. Then something stranger. Words that didn't make sense. Chocolates and turnips. I dropped the phone. I didn't even grab my coat. I ran straight out, the door into the storm, not looking back. But as I reached the car, I glanced up at the building one last time. And in the window by Jack's desk, I swear I saw a shadow. And it was smiling.